Welcome everybody for our power mapping, advancing advocacy or DEI in STEM event today. We're really happy that you're here. Before handing things over to our moderator, I just wanted to say a couple words about NSPN. For those who aren't familiar with NSPN or are new, we're an association of civically engaged individuals. We also have local chapters that are nationwide. We focus on providing educational opportunities such as this workshop for those who are interested in building skills and creating networks and advancing their careers. So this event has been a collaborative event put together by the Advocacy and the DEI committees. The Advocacy Committee, our next meeting is May 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And the next DEI Committee meeting is May 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register on the NSPN website, or you can join the DEI or Advocacy Committee Slack channels for more information. And with that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Deepa.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our power mapping workshop today. So today we have a great workshop for you all. So not only will it be super interesting and filled with a lot of useful facts, it's also going to be very engaging. So be prepared to participate. And if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat room, and there will be a Q&A after the presentations. Okay, so I have the honor of introducing our great presenters today. First, we have, well, this is in no particular order. We have Melissa Vergara, who manages the online community and partnership development of the Union of Concerned Scientists, Science Network. She specializes in engaging scientists and science organizations in efforts that support long-term movement building and culture change towards embracing advocacy as a critical component of science role in society. We also have Stefano Cadaldi. He is currently an associate research scientist at Columbia University, studying complex cognitive abilities. At Columbia, he is head steward for the postdocs and associate research science union, as well as a member of the bargaining committee, contributing to improving working conditions for all postdocs and other employees within the university. His work includes the creation of the Committee for Power-Based Harassment and the workshop IDEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Leadership. Both committees aim to create a safe and fair work environment for all members of their unit and other workers at Columbia. Last, we have Tosin Fadeye. She is a Science Network Senior Outreach Coordinator at UCS. She uses her background as a scientist to inform programming for Science Network membership cultivation, leadership development, and internal tracking processes. Prior to working at USC, Tosin worked to strengthen biological safety in laboratories and prevent civilian exposure to dangerous pathogens. So without further ado, I ask that you give your full undivided attention to Melissa, Stefano, and Tosin.
Thank you so much, Tiba. I'm gonna share some slides with you all. Let's see. Awesome. Well, we are excited to be here. Today we're gonna take a deeper look at how to create change within institutions and offer some tools to help you map out your advocacy path to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And no matter what issue you're working on, there are steps you can take to align your vision with concrete goals and actions so you can figure out what it looks like to move forward on those goals. So we'll share some concrete tools you can apply to think through your role in advancing DEI within your institution or within a broader policy landscape. So we're going to share a widely used tool for building out strategic engagement which will ultimately help you make the most of your limited time and energy and strengths and assets to advance your goals. And we will be focusing mostly on institutional change today. So within your labs or academic institutions, scientific societies, or other organizations that you belong to or volunteer with. But these tools absolutely apply to policy change as well. That's mostly how we use them at UCS. So just know that you can use them in both of those frameworks. A little bit more about us before we dive in. As Tiba mentioned, I'm the Science Network Senior Manager. My background is not in science, it's more on the advocacy side. My background is in political organizing. And now I get to train scientists to embrace their role as both scientists and constituents to advocate for equitable science-based policies. I also identify as a white woman and recognize that within our society, I have a lot of privileges that come with those identities. So I'm constantly learning, unlearning, relearning how to be a better ally and co-conspirator with my BIPOC colleagues and marginalized communities that we work with at UCS. I don't consider myself an expert on DEI, but I think it's part of my job to think about how we're centering equity in our work at UCS. So I'm here with a spirit of humility, and I'm also hoping to learn from you all today, as well as hoping that you can learn something from me. I'll pass it over to my colleague Tosin.
Hey, thanks, Melissa, and thank you, Tiba, for the introduction earlier. My name is Tosin. I'm a Senior Outreach Coordinator in our Science Network at UCS. As Tiba mentioned, my background is in biosecurity and biodefense, and eventually I became more involved in science communication and science policy, and now I work to organize scientists. So, as you might be able to guess, biodefense is a very narrow and specific field. And the global security space, as you can probably guess, is mostly dominated by older white men. In both my academic and professional careers, there weren't a lot of people who look like me or share my identities as a Black woman. I've witnessed or experienced firsthand a lot of the challenges that come with being a person of color in predominantly white spaces, but I also understand that any person, regardless of their identities, can perpetuate systemic injustices. Historically, we've come a long way, but part of my work in the Science Network is to build a more consistent culture of centering equity. I'm excited to be here with you all today, and I'm sure Melissa is just as thrilled as I am to have some great conversations with you all about power mapping and incorporating DEI in our work. Next slide. So I also wanted to share a little bit about UCS's approach to advocacy and organizing scientists. When we think about the need for science advocacy, we like to remind people that data and research don't speak for themselves. It's important to remember that data is only as useful as the story it's being used to tell. Throughout history, we've seen statistics used in a way that perpetuates injustice. It doesn't paint a full picture or makes assumptions about a group of people without considering how inequities over time have impacted them. Only people can speak for science, and people come with their own values, biases, and assumptions. So while science isn't partisan, it is political, because decisions about research, funding, and data are about the distribution of power. I bring this up because it is important for you all to understand the values that we at UCS are bringing to our approach to science advocacy and advocacy in general, and because thinking about the distribution of power is an important lens when you're thinking about creating change. Another dimension of power to think about is the power that you all have as members of different organizations and institutions, specifically through groups like NSPN or other scientific societies. There are structures in place that you can utilize, and there's also some that you can change to advocate for more equitable policies, processes, and outcomes, and also power in numbers when you come together to stand up for DEI issues.
All right, so before we dig into advocacy and power mapping, wanted to share a little outline of what we'll cover today. We do want to hear some brief intros from those who are in the room, just to get a sense of who's with us. We're going to talk about a definition of advocacy, and then dive into power mapping, sort of step by step. What does it look like? And hear a more detailed case study from Stefano before we head into breakout groups to practice a little bit of power mapping and debrief what that process looks like. And hopefully we'll have time for some of your questions and share some next steps. So just a couple poll questions, though y'all are welcome to share in the chat as well if you want to say hi, so we get a sense of who's in the room. But wanted to hear from you, Tiba, if you want to pull up the first poll question. How have you engaged with advocacy so far? And it looks like you can only choose one, but if you've done multiple, feel free to put that in the chat. So are you an experienced organizer? Have you maybe taken a few actions? Do you belong to some groups that advocate for DEI already? Maybe you've shared some resources, or maybe you're new to this space, in which case, welcome. And the second question is, do you have a DEI issue in mind that you're already actively involved in or plan to become involved in? So we'll give just a few more seconds for folks to weigh in. All right, I think we can close the poll. There we go. Finally got 100% participation. Thanks, everyone. Let's see. Can you all see the results now? I see a nod. Excellent. So we have a pretty good range of experience. We have some organizers here, and we have some folks who have taken action previously, as well as some folks who are new to the space. And then almost evenly split across the board in terms of if folks have an issue in mind or not. I asked about if you have an issue that you're already involved in, because it can be helpful to have a specific example in mind as we go through power mapping. But if you don't, that's totally fine too. That's why we're going to go through the case study together. All right. I also wanted to acknowledge that we are seeing some pushback against DEI initiatives in some states and institutions. The impacts of the Supreme Court decisions, state laws, and disinvestment in DEI initiatives is unfortunately having a chilling effect across the country. My former colleague, Jacob Carter, actually wrote a really good piece on the most recent attack from Congress proposing to defund DEI initiatives at medical schools that we can include in the follow-up as a good summary of what some of these current attacks on DEI look like. We do know that progress is never linear, it's always one step forward, one step back, or two steps back, but there are ways that we can protect ourselves as we are advocating for stronger DEI initiatives within our institutions. So these are a few steps that you may want to consider taking before engaging. And again, it will depend on what the landscape that you're engaging in looks like. So first, just do some research and learn about the laws that are in your state, whether there have been laws that have been proposed or laws that have actually passed that are preventing universities from teaching about or speaking about anti-racism or DEI. Also look to see if there are policies on campus or within your institution that have taken some sort of action on this recently. You also want to know your rights around advocating as a citizen or a community member and as a student or a postdoc. The Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, they're not just for climate scientists, they have excellent resources for all scientists and students who are engaging in advocacy on how to make informed decisions about how to safely and effectively participate in advocacy and activism. So you want to keep in mind the location, nature, and subject of your speech, as well as who you're employed by, because all of those things can have implications for how the First Amendment protects you against government action resulting from your activities. I share that not to scare you, but just to be aware that there are some rights that can protect you, but there are things that may not be protected depending on how you're engaging in First Amendment activities. You may also want to think intentionally about your digital presence as a way of protecting yourself from potential retaliation. At UCS, we call this digital hygiene, and it includes things like maintaining a clear delineation between your professional email account affiliated with your employer and your personal account, using your own equipment and devices for personal communication, familiarizing yourself with and following your employer's email retention policies. And I know that there are some gray areas here for what this looks like if you are advocating for change within your institution and you're a student. But again, these are just some things that you want to probably do a little research around and consider. And the final thing I'll offer is that I want you to find your allies and build community in this space, not only because it will make your advocacy efforts stronger, but because it will help sustain you over the long term by having people to celebrate wins with and commiserate over losses. You know, that really builds resilience into your advocacy work, and it makes it more fun and therefore more sustainable. All of that being said, you're all here because you care deeply about doing the right thing and creating change within your institutions, and building a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable place for education and for work. So I'd like to ask you to take a few moments to reflect on a time where you helped influence change. This could be passing a piece of legislation if you're more familiar with engaging in the policy advocacy space. Maybe it was getting funding for a project, changing guidelines or internal processes within your institution if you've done some of that work already. You know, maybe it was just convincing a family member to do something. It can be really small scale. But think about a time where you helped influence change and write down on a piece of paper or, you know, type out who you were trying to convince, what you wanted them to do, and if anyone else helped you or if you had any additional resources or information that you needed to succeed. So I'm going to pause for just about 30 seconds to give you time to reflect, and then we're going to discuss together. "30 seconds of silence feels so long on a Zoom webinar." Okay, hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to hold this example in mind and start to think through your target and your ask and what resources you used. We're going to send you into breakout groups of just 2 to 3 folks for I think like 5 minutes to give you a chance to share your examples with others and see if there were any common threads or patterns that you all identify. So I'm going to let Tiba work the breakout room magic. All right, you should be able to join now. We'll see you all back here in a few moments.
I was thinking I might jump into a room because I actually really want to participate.
Yeah, go
I
for
don't have any
it.
other responsibilities, so I was gonna do that. Y'all
Good.
okay?
Yeah. I'm gonna stop sharing and try to reshare because I feel like the slides are showing up weird. Oh no, I think it looks the same. Never mind. Sorry. Also, now that's on the recording. Yay.
Can you hear the train or the music? Because okay, good. Because I New York City apartment, I cannot stay away from noise, so it's good that you cannot hear it. Okay, good.
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay. We already have an interesting question in the chat.
I haven't seen that legislation. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I was just Googling it now. Apparently they passed it last minute.
Oh no, Stefano, can you put me back in room one?
Yeah,
I was disconnected, sorry.
yeah, I'll put room 1.
Thank you.
Hiba, do you have a countdown going? I can't see one.
It's been 3 minutes. 2 more minutes.
Okay.
I'm gonna close all the rooms at 6:30.
Sounds good. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Do we have a volunteer who wants to share, what they chatted about in their breakout room? Yeah, Freddie.
Howdy, I'm Freddie. I was in a group with Laureline and Paloma, and we discussed one of the key things. We shared stories of like recent victories or recent initiatives we worked on, and one thing we kind of hit on was like one of the something that was important in all stories, like having that person who is like one of the ways you can help build with a grassroots campaign is being that person who's willing to like speak up first, and like how that can encourage other people to like join in the conversation, especially people who are like more not moved or like more nervous that they're the only one facing a problem or the only one dealing with an issue, and just showing that there are other people who are dealing with the same thing and like can be a great way for building community, and then that way can direct you to solving the issue or not solving it, or at least bringing more attention to and beginning the process of working through it. Does that make sense?
Totally. And thank you for modeling that by sharing first in the report back.
Yeah, I felt like we couldn't have talked about it and then not done it.
I love it. Does anyone else want to share?
I can share a little bit about what I talked about, and that was we had sort of a funding situation in my program, and we talked about sort of power differentials between professors and students, and how that can be a really, really tricky thing to overcome. And personally had lots of struggles with, I mean, not but like with experiencing people who had power struggle or power difference issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for naming that, and thank you for sharing, Jane. I'm gonna pop my slides back up here. So it sounds like you all had some good conversations, and at its core, these questions that you were reflecting on are the beginning of your power map. So before I hand it over to Tosin to outline in a little bit more detail, part of what I hope comes through in today's workshop is the power of coming together with others and building people power to advance DEI within your institutions. So think about this as a tool you can use on your own, but also start to think about, how you can use this to get more people involved in your efforts as well. All right, so Tosin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. All right, so let's get into the training about power mapping. But first, we'll talk about what power mapping is. So power mapping is a tool to help you identify the avenues and relationships that will help you influence the decision maker that you're targeting. It will help you figure out the best possible target, aka who can make the change you're seeking, what and who might influence them to say yes to the thing that you want them to do, and the pathways and relationships that you can explore to get more access or put more pressure on them. We use power mapping at UCS to help us decide on the most strategic actions to take, ensure our messages and approaches are resonant, and to build awareness and influence. You can use power mapping at any level of change, but at UCS, we most often use it to help chart our path for our state or federal policy engagement. But personally, we've used it at the institutional level and can confirm that it works. I also want to highlight that even though we're talking about targets and the word targets can feel confrontational or divisive, it doesn't have to be. The internal campaign we created within UCS was to get buy-in, and it was all about relationship building and persuading people to see how our plan would benefit them. It wasn't confrontational or negative at all. So I'll be using the word target, but if you're uncomfortable with that word, think of it as key decision maker. So power mapping always starts with some variation of these three questions. So the first question, what really needs to change? This would be your goal, and it must be concrete and measurable. We want to be able to ask this question, did the change happen or not? The second question, where is that change made? This should be time-bound and should have a specific change vehicle. For example, this could be a change in organizational policy. It could be electing new people to a board or to a committee, or it could be advocating for a budget to support low-income or marginalized students, for example. And then the third question is, who can make that change happen? This one person is going to be your target. Oftentimes, there are multiple possible decision makers or targets at play, but it's best to choose just one to start with. Depending on how hard or complicated your ask is, you might need to start with one target and then move on to the next when you're done with them. But you can only focus on one person at a time. To help narrow it down, ask yourself, who has the most authority, who's the most movable on the issue, and who do you have access to currently? Next slide. So when researching your target, before you do that, before you actually reach out to your target, you need to do a little bit of background research on what might move them. So we've got 5 questions here to get you started. The first one, what have they said on this issue before? Have they spoken publicly about DEI? Do they belong to committees or groups that are actively working on DEI issues? The second question, what do they stand to win by saying yes? Or what do they stand to lose by saying no? Self-interest is a real motivator. This will help you decide the balance of pressure versus persuasion when you're engaging with this decision maker. The third question, who can directly influence them? This could be personal contacts, it could be professional. Who helped them get to where they are? These could be mentors, it could be former bosses or senior colleagues. Or where do they want to go next? And who can help them get there? Who is most impacted and has a direct stake in this matter, and how? Our fourth question, whose support is especially important to them and why? Beyond just who influences them, whose opinion do they really care about having in their corner? Are there particular groups on campus or even external groups that could influence their decision? For example, if you're trying to influence a faculty member, maybe this could look like the faculty senate or a professional society they belong to, or even their union. And then our last question here is, what has prevented them from saying yes so far? Why haven't they acted? We want to know what's preventing them from acting. Remember that the status quo is powerful, and sometimes people just need a little nudge to do the right thing. But sometimes folks are fearful of losing their power or their privilege, and that can be preventing them from acting. We can share with you a longer list. Sorry, my dog is barking. A longer list of questions that you could use to research your target. But for now, let's talk about creating a plan of action.
All right, so once we know more about what could push or persuade the people that we need to say yes, it's time to build your strategy or your plan of action. So the first question to think about is who? So who are the people either within your network or that you can collaborate with who can carry the message forward and bring in the critical perspectives needed to your target. So some things to consider could be institutional affiliation. You know, is it more important to have folks from inside your institution to join you to influence your target? Or could it be beneficial to have some external voices as well? Also want to think about any personal connections that you might have to the target or that other folks might have that you could leverage. You know, are there specific areas of expertise or skills that could be useful as you're developing your approach? Are there personal stories that you want to uplift, especially by those who are being most impacted by the issue, that you can use to demonstrate the importance of your case? Are there other community connections with those who are most impacted, whose voices you want to make sure are represented in this? And then, like, are there some heavy hitters that you want to bring in, maybe some influencers, whatever that means to your target, whose voices you want to make sure are represented? Another lens when you're thinking about whose voice is important to think about is where people fall on the spectrum of allies. So that's what this image is. It's a tool to help you think about how to bring more people into your efforts. And the most important area to focus on here is actually not the red. It's not your opposition. Where you want to focus your efforts is starting on the far left side of the spectrum, moving towards the middle, because you want to build momentum and show that there's a lot of energy around the issue that you're working towards. So you want to start with your active allies. These are probably the people that you're going to build a power mapping plan with. They're going to be the first people that you are bringing on board and talking about how to move forward with. Then you want to move on to your passive allies. So finding ways to get them to be more active and more involved. Maybe you want to move them from just listening in the background of a meeting to getting them to actively participate or to sign a petition or to show up at another event, sort of like moving them along. And then eventually you'll move on to the neutrals to see if you can get them to take a small action with you. And oftentimes that's enough to demonstrate that there's real support for the efforts that you're advocating for. You rarely want to spend time trying to move your active opponents because it's just not going to be worth your time or energy. Another question to think about is the types of actions that your base or your allies can take that will help move your target. You want to prioritize actions that can show either that public opinion leans in a certain direction, preferably your direction, that the benefits of saying yes to what you're asking for are just too good, that the consequences of saying no are just too bad and that your target should avoid it, or ideally all of the above. Timing is also a critical piece of strategy to keep in mind. So when would your target be most likely to listen? Is there a time where they actually have to make a decision on this issue? So things like, obviously this is more obvious if there's a if there's a policy at play, you want to pass it before, the next round of legislators comes in. But if there are decisions about budgets or investments that can be part of this decision, what is the timing for when those decisions need to be made? What else is going on campus or within the organization? How do semester schedules and summer vacations play into all of this? And remember that it will likely take multiple touch points to build a relationship and influence your target. So sometimes the best time to start is right now. You might as well just get started. And there will be opportune times to take different types of action and engage with your target in different ways. And don't forget to consider what you can offer your target to get them to say yes. Maybe they want to see the data backing up your proposed change, showing some of the costs and benefits to taking action. Maybe instead of data, they want case studies or more stories or examples from other campuses or organizations who have made this type of change and what that's looked like for them. And most leaders are unwilling to make changes if they don't have support for doing so. So can you show them that they'll have support from the campus or from, at least your group for saying yes or for making the change? Or can you help them build support for these changes? All right, so all of that was maybe a little theoretical. So to ground this in a real life example, I'm going to hand it over to Stefano to talk about some of his organizing with postdoc workers.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Melissa and Tiba, everybody, for the introduction. As mentioned, I'm an associate research scientist at Columbia University, and here I am going to share one case study that we specifically worked with our local union here at Columbia. And you can probably just fill in this slide. It's easier. I did animate it, but you can just put everything on the screen. No worries. So I wanted to give a little very quick timeline of our work. Obviously, this is work that is specific to having the presence of the union, which helps. But I also going to mention that it's not necessarily it's needed in certain situations, but it's not necessary. You can definitely use the same approach that we use for your own advocacy, your own institution. But in our case, we started organizing for a union in 2018. We started negotiating with the university in 2019 and finally ratified our first contract in 2020. And we're actually now on our second contract that we just ratified in 2023. And out of the many things that we worked on, and this is a collaborative work that has been done by many, and I know that for some of these issues I'm not the first person that has spoken about it, but definitely it's a collective work, and that's why it's important to find your allies. One of the issues that I wanted to mention here today is our work on bullying and power-based harassment, and this is particularly interesting to me because first, is a topic that is not a mandatory subject of negotiation. So during a university contract negotiation, the university doesn't have to sit down with the union and discuss this topic. They're non-mandatory subject of negotiation. So it took a lot of extra advocacy to get them to agree to this discussion. And so that was very powerful for us to achieve that. And especially bullying and power-based harassment, because at a national level, it's not necessarily recognized as a type of harassment because it doesn't qualify under the general federal laws that target specifically other type of harassments around gender, sex, ethnicity, religion, and so on. So this was really important to us because this is something that was not protected in any way before. And so our work with this was really starting from nothing. So it was pretty cool to achieve something in this work. And I believe the idea we can go to the next slide, for the next session, next part of this workshop is really to try to work together how you will have worked out an issue like this one, and then we'll share what we did our here at Columbia University and work together through those 3 items that were described before, and meaning what really needs to change, what's the change that you want, and just making sure that it's concrete and measurable, and who can make this change happen. So who's the person that it's your target or person of interest for this change, and what methods you will use to influence the target. And so we're going to do, I believe, 3 separate breakout sessions. We're going to go question by question, and we'll divide everybody into groups, ask the first question. You guys are going to come up with your own answers, and then come back here, talk about it, and then move on to the next question. And I leave it to Tiba to start with the first question and start with the first breakout room. And remember, the first question is what really needs to change. So with this in mind, with the bullying and power-based harassment as your question, as your topic of interest, what is the change that you're looking for? And it has to be something concrete and measurable. And so we'll let you guys in the breakout rooms discuss what you think will be a good answer to this question, what really needs to change. And we'll give you 5 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then come back to discuss.
Stefano, would it be possible to change the the permission to view your poster?
Yes, I didn't realize there was, yes, I can change it right now.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm going to go join a breakout room.
Mhm.
Cool.
All right, done. Everybody can see the poster now.
I think I'm gonna hop into breakout room 1 just to see how it's going. Make sure folks know what the assignment is.
I can go into number 2.
All right, I'll do number 3 then.
Okay.
Right. I think I'm gonna give it a few seconds for everybody to come back. In the meantime, I can share my screen. Everybody should be able to see my screen. Perfect. Before we jump into the specifics of what we worked at, and again, this is just some of what the work that we did. Is not nearly a full description of the work that was done, but it's a few examples that I found with concrete as a case study. But does anybody want to share something from the discussion in their breakout rooms? And don't be shy. There is no big or little problem to solve within an institution, and there is no wrong answer. So feel free to share anything that was discussed in the breakout room. All right, if I don't get a volunteer, that's okay. That's totally fine. We will probably will have. Oh, we have someone.
Yeah, I was going to say that what we discussed was having the university institute a policy for harassment, bullying and harassment. Yeah, that was not already on the books.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely something, and then actually we'll get there. Anybody else wants to share? And we'll probably have time for Q&A afterwards as well to explore some of these more. But if you want to share a little bit, feel free.
I can just piggyback off of that theme. I think we specifically mentioned in our group retaliation from the university, especially against student protesters. And I think from our group's experiences, this can include, civil rights kinds of or political protesting, but also, union kind of graduate student union or student workers or researchers protesting as well. And especially, well, my campus specifically, professors are not held accountable for certain actions, but then students are immediately reprimanded, with the full extent of the wrath of the university. So I think this is a really important issue on campus.
All right. Yeah, that's a very valid point, and that's definitely a difficult conversation, but something that using similar methods that we discussed today, I think anybody can work on those topics as well at their institutions. And especially, I appreciate that you mentioned civil rights, and there are policies, there are laws that are already in place, even though there is no specific policy for that issue at your institution, but there are other venues that you can go to find help for the specific situations. Like, there are other ways. You don't necessarily the union, you don't necessarily need a policy to be in place already. But in our case, this was back in 2019 when we were negotiating for our first contract, and we were trying to discuss, okay, what do we need, what do we want in terms of worker rights for our workers. And the main two goals that came out in the conversation about anti-bullying and power-based harassment. One was the protection for the victims of bullying and power-based harassment, and for their job positions, because specifically for grad students, postdoc, associated scientists, the one major problem when bullying and power-based harassment arise is that if you decide to change lab and decide to change department, that might require you to start again your project, or maybe even leave the institutions and have to start again somewhere else. And obviously that is not ideal. So it cannot brings people into a block where they don't want to send a complaint because they don't want to lose their job. And this is particularly important for international workers where their visa also depends on that specific job. And then and with that comes accountability for the perpetrator, because a big problem with bullying and power-based harassment is that even if you do make a complaint and nothing happens to the person, then the person can go on creating the same problem for other students, for other postdocs. And so those were the two major goals that were measurable and concrete in our advocacy effort. Obviously, they come with limitations. The outcome has to be feasible, and there are restrictions on what can be accomplished. And obviously, when it comes to person-to-person interaction, there's always the complication of who is right in the conversation. So there obviously is a limitation there, and there is need for research to understand what's the status quo and what other institutions do, what are the legal procedures and possibility in terms of these specific issues. And our proposed solutions back then during our negotiation was there were several solutions, but something that was very concrete that we actually saw as a possible solution for this problem. One was the co-mentoring option. If your mentor is the perpetrator in these situations, if your professor, PI is the person that is causing the problem, the worker can continue the job at their institution by adding a commenter that is part of their curriculum. And so that was one of the ways to protect the workers. And then obviously the classic improved training for better mentorship practices, ensuring that this training is actually applied. And very important for us was the reporting system, right? Because when it comes to, and this is actually the case often with any type of harassment, not necessarily only bullying and power-based harassment, is that when you report a problem, the length of the process is long enough that it's not going to work for jobs that are, especially for postdocs, where usually you are employed on a one year by year basis. You cannot wait 6 or 8 months for a resolution on one of these issues. And so having a fast-moving and efficient process was really important for us in this specific issue. So the next question that we need to explore when you advocate for a specific issue, who is the decision maker? Who is the person that actually can make this change at your institution and apply your policy that you're proposing, or the actual concrete change that you proposed? And so we're going to do breakout rooms again. I believe it's going to be the same person. The same people are going to be in the same breakout rooms, and we're going to give you again 5 minutes to discuss, and we'll come back here to the main room.
I was debating whether I should give them time on their own.
I think you should join them. My internet is really unstable. That's why I have my camera on.
All right, a couple more seconds for everybody to join back. And once again, I'm gonna ask someone to share what they discussed in their breakout room. Yes, go ahead. I see Cassia, is that correct? I hope I did not mispronounce your name.
Kasha, but that's okay. Yeah, we talked about lots of different things. We talked about how honestly this is like a really difficult question to answer. And that you have to think a lot about like why people are there and what motivates them. And like we talked about like how like sometimes there's like committees or advocacy boards for these kinds of things. And it's very like institution, department specific.
Yes, anybody else? Okay. Yes, I mean, I think that that's a very good point, and it is complicated, and I will not deny that it's often difficult to find the person that is relevant for the specific issue. It might be a different person for each different issue. It might be a different person for the same issue across time. And so it's very important to do the work, do the research. In our case, we created a working group. We made sure that students and postdocs, who obviously are the most impacted by this issue, were represented. And that included people at different level, particularly HR, because HR is often the people that oversee the situations. And in our case, because of postdocs, also the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs and Labor Relations, because we're a union, were also two entities that were important for this. And we did engage in conversation with all the parties involved, but ultimately, and that took time to figure that out as well. The entity that specifically for Columbia University, because of a private institution, was the group that will make the decision. It was the provost and the trustees in our institution would sign off these new guidelines. And in our case, we have the equal opportunity and affirmative action. We oversee every case of bullying or harassment of any kind. And so those are entities that were important to involve, obviously, in the conversation, and ultimately will make the decisions. And, you know, in all of this process, you do always need to find your allies, as was mentioned earlier, and the people that have this information, because it's often not provided to you. It might be there, it might be difficult to find, and so definitely check with people at other institutions. These are things that you'd be surprised. Many institutions are actually been through similar things, with or without a union. There are policies in place at other institutions. Actually, some of the language that we ended up using for our contract was copied and pasted by another institution that has done something similar. So like, you'd be surprised that you find that what you want to achieve at your institution may have been done elsewhere already. And talk within groups of your institutions, both at a department or institution-wide level, because there are groups that may already be working on something similar, but they don't know that you're also working on something like that, and you know, creating that connection, and then you have more power because now you're combining forces. And so that's what we did through this collaboration and this working group. We eventually found the people that needed to sign off these guidelines that we drafted. And then ultimately, the last question that we wanted to discuss with you is what methods you will use to achieve those goals. And so now you have your concrete change that you want to achieve. You know where the people that can make the change, but what methods will you use in a situation like this? You have specifically focusing on bullying and power-based harassment. And we're going to do breakout rooms again, same people for each breakout room. And then 5 minutes, we'll come back here and wrap it up. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Um, Same as before, feel free to unmute and share what you discussed with your working with your breakout room. And again, there's no wrong answer because in many of the situations, you want to try every single method that that you have opportunity to access. Obviously, to the limits that come with the methods, but often case is not one and done way to achieve that goal.
I'm
Oh,
happy to speak again if there isn't anyone else who wants to share.
I see
Oh,
both
Fred.
you, Paloma and Freddie. Either of you, please go ahead.
Right.
Yeah,
I
take
was also in the position. Nobody else wanted to go. I go again. But yeah, we talked about. I was in the same group with Paloma. One thing we talked about is like public demonstrations have been proven to be very effective. Things like sit-ins, protests. If your grouping does have the backing of a union, striking is a very effective method. Withholding the labor that postdocs and graduate students provide from the university has been showcased to be has been proven time and time again to be a very effective method to get like your desired outcomes. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the point that was made at the very beginning about really one of the most powerful resources we have is, you know, the latent but supportive group of people around us. So I think that's something that's really powerful. Working groups, like Stefano mentioned, also really powerful. And you know, making really powerful institutions uncomfortable in the public eye never hurts.
Those are incredibly good points, and certainly something that we've done a lot. And it's important to mention that I describe all of these cases as a union-based case, but a lot of these things can be done. Um, um, the union helps significantly, but there are situations in which a union is not possible or maybe difficult. But this shouldn't stop you from doing following the same protocol to achieve those goals. And in our case, in fact, a lot of this work was done by a group of people started before we even formed a union, and before, you know, as a young union, it took some time to establish ourselves. So this was done by people that just dedicated their time, collected a incredible amount of data. This is just one example graph coming from a survey that I believe we can share in the chat, and it's accessible to everybody online. This is a very long report from a very extensive survey that was done by a group of people, but there were a lot of information there on the level of behaviors that people have experienced at Columbia. In terms of bullying and power-based harassment, over 200 respondents. We saw how this was affecting particularly our LGBTQ plus community that was the most affected according to this survey. We analyzed all this data and we presented this data at the working group with the specific guidelines there that we wanted. And then so that was one approach that we used to achieve this goal. And then we presented these guidelines, but we also put pressure, and similar to what it was described before, demonstrations, obviously union work helped there. We showed up at the provost office with the guidelines when the provost was not responding to these guidelines to approve them, and we shared on social media a group of people that were there at the provost office, you know, sharing these guidelines and ensuring that these guidelines were approved in a timely base, you know, and faster than the office was responding to our emails. And we had workers sharing their stories at the bargaining table during contract negotiation, and, you know, really hitting both the qualitative component where this is a real problem that is happening to many people and we have data to show that, but also quantitative component and showing that these are people that are actually affected. Even if it was just one person that was affected, it's still a big problem and this person should not be left alone. And so using both approaches was definitely beneficial. And we're very proud to say that now these guidelines are part of the union contract. So when in 2020, the university was not agreeing to have this language in our contract, but agreed to the working group. And then over the 3 years, the working group worked on these guidelines, and now we have those guidelines as part of our contract with the university. So now it's written there. And this is something that was mentioned before, and it's important now. The power is no longer at a higher rank level, but now the power is with the contract, right? The university has to listen to what is written in the contract, so the power is back to the workers, to, in our case, postdocs and grad students. And so that was very, very important to us. It was a good achievement. It took work. It was 4 years of work, but it's possible and can happen. And now we have a system in place that protect workers, but obviously it doesn't end there. The fact that this system exists and this language exists in the contract doesn't mean that the behavior has disappeared and the problem has disappeared. And so now the union is constantly working to ensure that these guidelines are implemented. We make sure to talk to our workers, to convince them that it's okay for them to share stories with us when they are experiencing a problem, and that there is a way to protect them in these situations. And the guidelines per se are far from perfect. There is obviously room for improvement, and we're continuing to work with our community to improve those guidelines. But this is just one example of what can be achieved, and by making sure that you follow those three major questions that are important. What is the change that you want? What are the people that can make the change? And what methods are you planning to use to achieve that goal? And I think now I give it back to Melissa?
Yeah, I want to be mindful of time. So I want to share a couple final opportunities for you all to stay involved in advocacy, recognizing that your responsibility to act in service of science for the public good can take place within your institution or within the broader policy landscape. So there are a couple of other trainings if you want to stay engaged with us. We have one tomorrow, if you're ready for another. This is a Train the Trainer on countering disinformation, with a specific focus on countering disinformation around voting and elections, given that we know that this is going to increase as we get closer to November. We're also offering a Science Advocacy 101 webinar on Thursday, which will be a broader overview of different pathways to influence decision-making as a scientist advocate. There's an incredibly important piece of legislation called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that is up for renewal, and it really needs to be strengthened and expanded to cover more communities who have been affected by radiation exposure over the past 30 years. So there's an opportunity for you to call Congress and ask them to strengthen that piece of legislation. And finally, just want you to stay in touch with us. If you're interested in more of these types of opportunities, please join the UCS Science Network so you can find out about more of our trainings coming up. With that, Tiva or Jane or Stefano, is there anything you want to highlight from NSPN before we see if there's a couple minutes for questions?
We only have 2 events that are ready to go, that we were ready to advertise for this event. One is a book club event that is happening on June 18th. Everybody's welcome to join join our Slack for links to all the events, but also you can find everything on the website. And this is an interesting conversation. We will share some chapters for a series of books that were chosen by our community, and people can read these chapters and then we'll discuss them. And they range from all sorts of topics, some related with trauma, but also with diversity, equity and inclusion. And so it could be a very, very interesting conversation. And I'll leave the next one to Jane.
Actually, I think Tiba is gonna do that one, and then our question and answer.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Yeah, I just wanted to flag that we have an upcoming advocacy event entitled Enhancing Public Engagement, Crafting Effective Public Comments. So if you believe that any of the initiatives that you are currently a part of or would like to become a part of would benefit from public engagement, please register for that event. It's going to be June 21st from 1 to 2:15.